Hi, so thank you all for being here. We want to dig into scaling innovation. It's hard, it's messy, it's ambiguous, especially in a world that seems to want fast scale and certainty. And if it were easy, we wouldn't need to have this panel. We've assembled some great brains. I thought we'd start off with Francis, who I'm, for the sake of discussion, calling our pracademic. Francis is someone who has worked as a practitioner with a number of companies and also in an academic setting. And so, Francis, why is it so hard to think about scaling innovation? Can you sort of frame what you've seen over the course of a career, really?
Yeah, sure. I'd be delighted to, and thank you for the invitation. So I think we can frame it on two ends of the continuum. One end of the continuum are these operationally tight organizations, and then they try to accommodate innovation, and even digital innovation, and it gets super challenging.
And accommodate, doesn't sound like you mean it in a nice
word.
Well,
this is why when you said that it's hard, that was like my kind way of saying, yeah, so like success and failure, and frankly, most often failure. So if you're operationally tight, you by definition are not hospitable to innovation. So there's that.
We ask people to raise their hands if they identify there? No.
So that's one end of the continuum, and then I'll go all the way over to the other end of the continuum when you might be like born out of innovation. So let's take a digitally native organization, and they know how to innovate and scale. I'll use as an illustrative example Uber. When I arrived there, like everyone knew how to grow. Everyone was thinking, how do we get more rides, more riders, more drivers? Very few people were thinking about how to develop the people. So the innovation occurred absent the people. Here, the operations are so great and so tight that sometimes innovation can't find its way in. And what I found at Uber, just as the most recent example I had, that I think that if you're born for innovation and you neglect the people, bad things will happen. It's just a matter of when. And most organizations wait for the bad and then are super sad, and then they do two things, which I'll tell you, but that just means we should do the two things first before the bad things happen. And the two things are they reinvent the culture instead of the founder's culture that was brought on down. They design a culture by and for the current employees. And they do a massive influx of education on all of the things we know how to do, which is how to teach management and leadership and culture.
So really, I think the challenge you're set up for us here is how do you have both things going and kind of bridge that divide. Yeah. Barbara, you talk a lot about the power of purpose. Talk a bit about that. I mean, you manage a huge global enterprise. You represent Siemens, which is a multi-industry company at massive scale. How do we were talking before, you talk about purpose as a driving theme of innovation for your employees and your customers. How can do they really take you seriously on purpose?
They do, and it's really this simple. A company that doesn't bring value to society shouldn't exist.
Right on, sister.
Right? So for 170 years, Siemens has been dedicated to addressing megatrends on a global scale. Today, we're thinking about urbanization, changing demographics, the digital transition that's happening, and we're asking, how does our know-how in infrastructure and industrial applications and in healthcare, how can that help make positive change in the world?
And then carry that through, then how does that become a sort of a spur for innovation?
So here's the rallying cry, right? What can we do now? Now that we have the tools that are digital, how do we bring that into practice? Last week I was at our factory in Grand Prairie and saw electrical systems, low voltage products, which are absolutely needed in order to build data centers. What the team has done is they've created this culture. We're referring to it as our ownership culture, right? Just turn to the employees in the factory and say to them, we've got these digital tools for you. What can you improve for capacity? They are at capacity today, and the question is, without expanding footprint, how much more can we get done? And so it was a day of getting an opportunity to see how they have taken our own digital tools, applied them in order to do more of what's needed so that Google and Microsoft and Apple can have their data centers.
So I want to dig in. You talk about ownership culture. Just bring that in a little bit more. What does that mean? If I show up tomorrow and work at Siemens, what would you tell me?
Well, on a very basic level, first and foremost, I want you to own a share in the company. right? I want you to be
give
a
that to me, or I
stockholder.
have to buy it?
And over the last year, actually, Siemens donated $300 million worth of shares to employees so that folks feel that sense of ownership and investment in the corporation. Then second, I want you to think about what it means when we make decisions on behalf of the company. We are really making those as if we are owners of the company. It's a little different than saying, using your own money, right?
Yeah.
Because everybody's money practices are different. But when we think about, hey, if I had the job of Joe Kaeser, the global CEO, what would be the right decision in this instance? That's where we're going.
Yeah, really interesting. So Minsuk, you talk a lot. You have this great quote about think of innovation as a portfolio of initiatives rather than a single magic bullet. You're working in one of the toughest industries in retail at Target. You guys are seemingly in a good place now. You went through some challenges. I mean, have people been looking for a magic bullet, and how did they go with this idea of a portfolio when you said there is no magic bullet?
Well, I think
they hired you for one, so that was good.
Well, it's not something that is in retail right now. I think it's easy to get distracted, right? Because there's so much going on, and every day you read in the paper, you read somebody doing something, a new technology, and it seems like there's a disruptor every day. With all these disruptors, what's going to be left at the end of the day, right? So if I go back to both what Francis and Barbara were talking about, that innovation needs to be linked to a purpose or a strategy, right? For Target, it is what we can do to make Target the easiest, most welcoming, inspiring, rewarding place to shop. And so as we look at all of our activity around innovation, we constantly have to come back to what are we doing in support of our strategy and how does this fit with our strategy? And then within that, recognizing that, if you want to scale, right, we need to focus on things that can scale to 1,800 different locations, 30 million guests that we see every week. It's a $75 billion retailer. So we can't chase after the one disruption that's going to affect the entire industry. We really need to be thinking about what is that portfolio of innovation that will affect and impact how our guests, our consumers feel when they shop.
It could be very distracting to think of a portfolio, but the way you're talking about sounds very disciplined.
It is a disciplined process. So I'll give you an example. We have a number of different activities that we run throughout the company that's intended to set up a process and set up some guardrails to encourage innovation and to let people run with ideas, but make sure that it is linked to a particular strategic pillar that we have. Right, so I'll give you one example. We run what we call demo days. They're quarterly days when it's a combination trade fair, science fair, cocktail hour, where on any given demo day, we'll probably have 100 or so different teams presenting ideas. And these are ideas that teams just initiated on their own. Could be part of their day jobs, or it could be part of something that they do in the evenings. When we bring those teams together, and for every team that shows up on a demo day, there's probably another dozen or so that don't make it. But we make sure that they have the right space, they have the right support, the infrastructure, the process to be able to make it to demo day. And if things look good, they look promising, then we'll encourage them to continue developing. We'll continue with additional resources and start the funnel, narrow that funnel down so that we can get it to a point of scaling at 1,800 different times.
So Barbara, how about you from a tactic perspective? Do you have something like demo days? I think you have an accelerator. You call it Next 47. Is
yeah,
that part
so
of your
for
process?
a company as big as Siemens, we've got to come at this from multiple angles, because I think we have every point on that spectrum, Francis, that you talked about. We've got businesses that have been there a long time, businesses that are new. So in order to disrupt ourselves, we actually have a venture capital arm. Next 47, it's located in Silicon Valley. They're making investments. By the way, we all know there's more money than there are ideas. And so, the thing that sets Siemens apart in these kinds of settings for those who are looking for the venture capital is access to Siemens customers. So, take a new idea and say, how can I bring this into the oil and gas segment, into the utility space, and give these inventors access to our portfolio, co-invent. We've taken that idea and actually done it inside the corporation as well. So across the country, we have 8 digital centers where we can bring together customers of ours, maybe even a little co-opetition, and then using the brain power of the folks on our staff, start building digital apps that are helping them transform business models and perhaps
So you've had to bring in
services.
people from the outside, or are these all people who were already in Siemens and they just miraculously were good at innovation as well?
First, I think that the most important thing we need to do is invest in our own employees. Yes, we're doing a lot of hiring. Today we have 1,500 open jobs for folks with digital skills, data scientists, et cetera. But we're investing $50 million a year in training for the workforce itself. And then one of the really interesting things we've done, and we're talking about it a lot with those who have interest, we've introduced the German apprenticeship model here in the United States. We've developed a playbook that others can use and apply. We're active now in 9 states with the idea that a young person coming out of school could start in one of our factories or in one of our digital centers, can go to school at the same time and come out a few years later with a degree, a job, and no debt, right?
And are you applying that in the innovation area, or that's just more the workforce of the future?
Oh, well, what's happening is that we've built our curriculum around the digital skills that are needed for the future. It's not white collar, blue collar. It's that new collar, middle skills section of the economy that we're working to hit.
So Francis, I mean, we've got to this point where clearly we're talking about culture and people. Give us a sense of why is it so hard to get these two tracks connected? You talk about this divide. You have this an amazing homework assignment for everyone here is to watch Francis's TED Talk. It's about building and rebuilding trust. So critically here to make this happen is trust. Why is it so hard?
Yeah, and if you watch it on 2x speed. I slow down inexplicably.
It was great. Yeah. It was great.
But I do think that, so the reason that we break down in trust is one of 3 reasons. Either people doubt our authenticity, they doubt our logic, or they doubt our empathy. And one of those will happen. Chances are it's going to be empathy on one part of it, because when we're innovating, it feels like we've left someone behind. Like when we're doing, or it feels like we have to trust someone to take us in a new direction. So there's either, do I trust the logic of you taking me in the new direction, or do I trust the empathy of your having left me behind?
And so that means we need to train our leaders differently,
Oh my gosh. So here's the beautiful thing. We know how to train leadership. There's lots of people that know how to do it. If you learned about leadership or strategy or marketing 10 or more years ago, please get re-educated. It's like,
yeah. Harvard might be a good place to start.
Or plenty of other places. Go to Siemens. But I do think that the world, like the accumulation of knowledge has happened so fast that we now just know a lot more things and know how to convey them a lot better.
So I'm going to ask you guys for some questions. Before I do that, Minsuk, you talk a lot about failure. In fact, you have this amazing quote that you say you have to fail to scale. And Francis talks about trust. Failure requires trust. Is that true? I mean, everybody says they want to fail, but really, I mean, tell us how you're doing that at Target.
You're right. I mean, it's easier said than done, right? Everybody talks about you got to encourage failure, you have to celebrate failure, et cetera.
It's like embroidered on pillows. Fail fast, fail small. Is it real?
But the reality is that when you do shut down something or when you stop a project, it hurts. Right? And I think the teams that experience that, it's real for them. But we have to go back to always asking, what did we learn from that? And I think it's about creating the right dialogue, creating the right culture, creating the right environment where people go into it recognizing that not everything's going to succeed. So I mentioned demo days earlier where for every idea that makes it, there's probably 10 or so that don't make it. Our accelerators, we run accelerators in the US and in India. And each cohort we run, we probably have a dozen or so companies go through. And luckily, the hit rate in terms of companies participating in some form or fashion with Target has been relatively good. It's around 50%. But what that means is that you've got another 50% of those companies that don't. So there is that failure. And what we try to do is that for each cohort, right, we ask the question, what can we learn from each one of these? We had a project recently where teams were really excited, and it was around auto replenishment, right, thinking about how consumers will interact and what their shopping behavior will be with the Internet of Things in a connected environment where auto replenishment of disposables, et cetera, can be a possibility. And this particular project, the team worked on for quite a bit, right? And in the end, we learned quite a bit from it, but we ended up canceling it. And does
Did you share those learnings with the whole team?
And that's the thing is, it's bringing the team together and giving them an opportunity to present to the leadership team and to others of what did we learn.
Barbara, how about you? You have a successful failure or a not successful failure you want to share?
Oh gosh, come back to me. Let me.
Francis.
Yeah. Well, I'll again bring. I have like many personally, but I'll bring one from Uber. So we were doing every part of the supply chain of having cars that are autonomous, doing each stage of it. We thought we were going to be in every stage of the supply chain, and we have now publicly stepped out of some of those areas. I think the key is, do we celebrate the failure, or do people feel ashamed of it? If shame is associated with failure, I think it's an embroidered pillow. If celebration and pride is associated with big bets and failure.
So what's a tip of how someone here could celebrate a failure?
Oh, quite literally.
Throw a party?
Very close. So the way we informally give praise to one another is we smile, we touch them, what we usually do when people fail is we stop making eye contact.
No, I always call it the stink of fail.
Yeah.
It's like you smell bad.
Yeah,
right?
so
Just...
quite literally, all of our discretionary Scooby snacks should go towards thanking people for putting us in a position where we got to learn that super expensive lesson only once.
Yeah. Who has a question? Anyone want to take on, share a fail challenge or challenge anything that's been said? Get a tip? We have a question over. Oh, sorry. We'll go right here. I'm going to make the woman with the paddle run. She's got to get her exercise. Here we go. Okay. We'll go. If you could just stand up and say your name and your affiliation.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm CJ Warner, and I run operations for a company called Endeavor, which is a major refining company west of the Mississippi. Great. And I enjoyed everyone's comments. I have a question for Francis, because you put things in such a nice frame. So for those of us who were trained a really long time ago, how would you frame up the difference between what we did learn before and what we really ought to know now about innovation?
Yeah, so
in a minute or less.
In a minute or less, so no problem. So when you learned innovation, you probably learned how to do innovation without people saying it, with a narrow slice of people. There are now more and more varied people involved. So you have to update every part of innovation that you learned, but replace homogeneous, because it was with more and more varied. Yeah.
So you're looking for more diverse mindsets?
Absolutely, and when we said diverse before, we meant it quite narrowly, like in all of the examples, but it will be even more diverse. So old and young, Republican and Democrat, experienced, intuition, like literally everything. But if you just apply more and more varied to everything you learned, I think that will show you where the gaps are.
Barbara, how does that play into the training that you're doing, your master guild and kind of like your apprentice program?
Yeah, well, right, and I'm just thinking, you're making me think about this visit to Grand Prairie again. Here we are in a manufacturing environment where I think if I'd gone there 10 years ago, I might have seen everybody kind of looking the same, doing the same. And instead, what I found was this vibrant difference of generations, ethnic backgrounds. More importantly, though, training. So the software developer side by side with the mechanical engineer, side by side with the electrical engineer going, we're trying to solve this problem. Boy, that's powerful.
Really good way to think about it. We had another question back here, I think. Couple in here. Mark, I thought you had a question, but.
I was going to ask the same thing.
Okay, great.
Wow. Good discipline.
Hey.
Hi, Bashir.
Bashir Janjawat, Chairman and CEO of Calculi. If you look at the innovation frameworks, where the big companies are not doing so well is the explore. Exploit, we're doing okay, which is taking advantage of the current business models, current resources. We're not able to integrate new innovation into the streams to scale that. And it's obviously active inertia that is at the play, that not accepting the new innovation within our existing architecture. How are you addressing that?
Minsuk, why don't you take that? I mean, you've worked, before you came to Target, you worked at Lego, which had an incredibly rich background of kind of what's new and next. How are you getting the exploring part of what's new and next into Target?
I'd say that, it has to be anchored in what is the strategy, what's the intent, right? What are you trying to address here? So for example, with us, as I mentioned earlier, what we're trying to do is create that environment for our guests in the shopping environment. And one example around a strategic pillar for us is leveraging our stores as hubs, right? taking all our stores, rethinking about our stores as hubs in a truly omni-channel environment. And you know, we're now running probably on any given day, 50% or more of our online orders are being fulfilled by our stores. And if that's the strategy you're trying to support, then that then starts to hone in and focus on what are the innovations you need for that, right? So our acquisition of Shipt last year to provide that last day or the last mile same day delivery is one example of that. You know, the way that we have retrofitted all our stores are now running on 1,400 or more to be able to ship from the back of the store. The way that we have changed how we train our in-store team members to be able to pick, pack, and ship orders. So really making sure that the innovations that you're looking for and the innovations that you're exploring are linked back to a strategic rationale or a strategic emphasis.
You guys keep coming back to strategy. Francis, you've been a strategy guru for much of your career. What is good strategy and why is it so hard for us to find?
Yeah, so I think the way to think about it, and you're exactly right, and it's an awesome question, that we often think that strategy is let's go out and find the good ideas, and it's the good ideas conditioned on are they good for us? So the new thing I want to do B, does it make A better? And does A make B better?
And it's on your strengths.
And so we have to, and so here's the thing on the strengths is that we try with one thing to be all things to all people, and it's a disaster. So what I often say is that in order to be great, you have to be bad. And it's super hard for type A people to be bad, but we have to be bad in the service of great. And then if you want to do additional things, they too have to be great and bad at things. And strategy, in my mind, is how do we make sure that each of the independent things we do makes the ecosystem better.
I love that, the good and the bad, the tension of the two.
Oh.
We have time for one last question. Anyone have something on your mind that you want to, here we go. If we could get the paddle over here, wait for the paddle, and that has a microphone with it. A person who has a microphone.
Hi, I'm Joelle Kaufman from Dynamic Signal. So one of the things in Silicon Valley where we are is the rate of innovation becomes exhausting.
Yeah.
Now, at a Siemens, at GE, at Uber, at Target, that's a lot of people who potentially get a lot of whiplash. So I'm curious how you maintain the energy for continuous innovation and disruption without exhausting your workforce.
So Barbara, can you and then I'm going to have Francis finish it. But give us a quick answer on what would you advise?
What I would advise is we do have to think of this almost as incubators speeding out ideas. And I think it's absolutely okay to let people run through some cycles and rest.
Rest. Mincer.
I think you have to identify where that choke point is, right? You know, for us, I'd rather open it up upstream. There's a lot of energy there, lots of ideas coming in. But at the point that we need to start prototyping and testing in our stores and we want to scale that up 1,800 times, you can't do that, right? We need some control there. So understand where the choke point, where in the organization will that exhaustion come in, understand where that is, and then just control
right people,
what
right
in.
place, right time. Francis.
And I would just say that the culture of innovation is rarely exhausting. The culture of urgency is entirely exhausting.
Emergency.
And so I would just separate all the false startup and shutdown, and you'll have just ample time for innovation.
So in our last minute left, I'm going to ask you each to just give us one thing that you would advise people when they leave here and go back to their office to do differently. Minso.
Ask yourself, are you chasing after a rabbit or are you looking at a portfolio of ideas?
Barbara.
Get that decision making out as far as you can.
Francis.
Make the world better for women, you make it better for everyone.
So obviously some great brains here. They'll all be around this afternoon. Dig in with them, find out some more secrets to scaling innovation. Thanks a lot.
Great moderating.